Welcome to Postmodernism Part 2. We hear a lot about postmodernism, but what is it? Well, there are so many opinions out there that it seems like nobody knows. Postmodernism is a diverse collection of ideas that have coalesced in the turmoil of doubt that followed the partial collapse of modernism. What happened to modernism? Well, we dumped it because it failed to live up to its promises. And that's because it was a half-truth. We felt betrayed. And so now, as a culture, we have trust issues. We don't trust what created the mess that the 20th century was. That includes reason, of course, but also governments, science, education, the military, the police, big business, boomers, and the church. Can we trust anything? Can we know anything for sure? Christians want to say, of course we can know things. But that sentiment usually comes out of enthusiasms that are rooted in rationalist certainties. Postmodernist thinkers hold a variety of worldviews, some of which are not consistent with Christianity, but some that are. In other words, postmodernism is a half-truth too. Because it's so hard to clearly articulate exactly what postmodernism is, we are making a collage of impressions. Here is what we made in the first video on postmodernism. The link to that video is in the description below. This collage so far shows that matter is all there is. Categories don't work. There are no big stories, only smaller ones. You can't know anything for sure. Everything is fragmented. Lots of people are shouting, but those are the ones that didn't get the memo about uncertainty. And you might not be a thing. So now let's continue to build on this collage. The next impression of postmodernism, for those of you who are counting, it's the sixth one, is depthlessness. This is a term used by literary critic Frederick Jameson. Depth has this tendency to move us into meanings and narratives and truth claims. Postmodern culture resists these, and consequently, they tend to stick to the surface of things. Postmodernism prefers depthlessness. Jameson uses art to illustrate this, so I will start with art as well. Here is Andy Warhol's Pink Cow with a Yellow Background. Good title. That's what it is. That's all it is. Some might argue that Warhol is describing postmodern culture. Maybe, but he's making no comment on it. Oh, different associations are possible, but they are not necessary. There's really nothing beyond here. It is what it is. This painting illustrates the depthlessness of postmodern culture. Now, keeping with the agricultural theme, let's look at this Jean-François Millet painting called The Gleaners. It was painted in 1857. The title evokes instructions in Leviticus for the ancient Israelites to leave grain that was missed after the majority of the field was harvested. These leavings were for the poor to collect. Ruth was a gleaner in the field of Boaz. The title of this painting points to something deeper than what is shown on the surface. Looking at the painting itself, we see the women collecting the few heads of grain that have been missed by the harvesters. And there in the background, look at those huge mounds of bounty loaded on the wagon to be processed and brought into the barns. Beyond the immediate images of this painting are the deeper meanings. To permit the poor to glean is a form of justice, but this painting asks if this is enough. If we spend just a few moments with this painting, we cannot help but being drawn into the meanings beyond it. Today we are inundated with information, especially if we look at our phones for 8 hours a day. Our connection with real things is mediated by our phones. But these are images. They are flat, two-dimensional. When all we see is the surface of things, the surface becomes all that matters. Let me show you some pictures, and you guess where, and then I'll tell you when. Where do you find these buildings? Amsterdam is the answer. Most of the houses on the canal rings in Amsterdam were built in the 17th century. Now, how about this one? It might be a little harder. If you guessed Paris, you're right, 18th century. How about this one? This style is called Georgian. It was in vogue in England from 1714 to 1830 when the kings were named George. Each of these styles comes from a particular time and place in Europe. Okay, so I went shopping in an outlet mall the other day, and as I sat on the outdoor bench, I looked at the decor. The false second floor of the shops included facades borrowed from all these and other particular times and places. The architecture of this mall has been emptied of both place and time, emptied of meaning and anything beyond. It was just a bunch of surfaces to adorn an outdoor mall. In postmodern culture, we plunder the past. We empty them of time and place and then use them to accessorize the present. What my outlet mall does to architecture, social media does to our very souls.
To our very souls.
Okay, that was just a little melodramatic. I'll use it in a tweet. But think about it. When my connection to reality is primarily through the flat screen of my phone, the real is replaced more and more with depthless images, and they become more and more real to us than the actual things. And when we flatten reality, how long before we flatten ourselves? But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's for Postmodernism Part 3. We flatten reality. A real cat spends a lot of time sleeping and does all kinds of things when we're not looking at it. The cats we encounter on our phones are much cuter, or funnier, or interesting than the actual cat who's sleeping or out of sight. We might say that the cats in the videos are more real than the real cat because they're doing more cat things. The cats, the architecture, all those things that we encounter as depthless images make reality depthless. It's all about images. Collect them as you will. We will add these images to our collage to communicate a lack of depth that we experience in postmodern culture. So what is a human being in postmodern culture? I was going to say that a human being is an entity covered in empty images, but that's not exactly right. There is no entity to cover. The images just sort of form the person by loose associations. Formed by associations to empty images. The Bible uses the word image to describe human beings as well, but its use of the idea of image is far from empty. It's deep. Here is the text from Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. The Hebrew word for image here is selem. It means idol. You know, those little statues that functioned as representations of the god. To describe human beings as an image of God packs this idea into what a person is. It fills each of us with incredible significance and depth. When you look at a person, any person, you see a representation of God. This sort of language was used all over the ancient Near East, but it always meant one guy, the priest king. He was the only one who was made in the image of a god, giving him that special elevated place, and the rest of humanity was meant to serve him. For God to declare all human beings to be in his image is a radical move. You and I are not depthless images formed by a collection of carefully curated images amongst a plethora of other depthless images on our handheld technologies. We, each of us, were knit together in our mother's womb. We are filled and full images of the invisible God who created all that is. And we were made for a purpose. And that purpose is the subject of our last video on postmodernism. And I hope to see you then.